The fluorescent lights above Bennett's desk cast harsh shadows across his face as he slid the termination letter across the mahogany surface. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it, the crisp white paper feeling like ice against my fingertips. After 7 years of dedicated service, 7 years of building the compliance department from the ground up, this was how it ended, with a piece of paper and a man who couldn't even look me in the eye. "Catherine, this is effective immediately," Bennett said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Security will escort you out. Your personal belongings will be mailed to you." I stared at the letter, the words blurring together as my mind struggled to process what was happening. Terminated for cause. Failure to maintain departmental standards. Breach of company protocol. Each phrase felt like a slap in the face, especially knowing the real reason I was sitting in this chair. 3 weeks earlier, I had done exactly what my job required. I had flagged illegal off-label marketing tactics that could have cost our pharmaceutical company millions in fines and destroyed lives in the process. I had followed protocol, documented everything, and reported it through proper channels. I had done my job with the integrity and thoroughness that had earned me recognition as one of the top compliance officers in the industry. My name is Catherine Matthews, and I had spent the last 7 years turning Medicore Pharmaceuticals' compliance department into something we could all be proud of. When I started here, fresh out of law school with a specialization in pharmaceutical regulations, the department was a joke, 2 part-time employees who rubber-stamped whatever the sales team wanted. I had built it into a 15-person powerhouse that had saved the company from countless regulatory nightmares. I had personally overseen the implementation of new quality assurance protocols that reduced our FDA violations by 90%. I had trained hundreds of employees on proper marketing practices. I had even developed a reporting system that other companies in our industry had started to emulate. The pharmaceutical trade magazines had written articles about our transformation, and I had been invited to speak at conferences about best practices in compliance. But none of that mattered now. Sitting across from Bennett Walsh, the CFO who had made it clear from day one that he saw compliance as nothing more than an expensive obstacle to profitability. "This is about the Morrison account, isn't it?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Bennett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is about your inability to be a team player, Catherine. Your constant interference with legitimate business operations." Interference. That's what he called it when I had discovered that our sales team was actively promoting our arthritis medication for off-label use in treating depression, a practice that was not only illegal, but potentially dangerous. The drug hadn't been tested or approved for psychiatric use, but the profit margins were too tempting for Bennett to resist. "I was protecting the company," I said, my hands clenching into fists in my lap. "What they were doing could have resulted in a federal investigation, not to mention putting patients at risk." "You are being paranoid," Bennett shot back, finally meeting my gaze. "Those were minor marketing adjustments, nothing more. But instead of coming to me first, you went over my head to the board. That kind of insubordination is exactly why you're sitting here." The irony wasn't lost on me. I had gone to Bennett first, had tried to explain the legal ramifications, had begged him to shut down the campaign. But he had dismissed my concerns, told me to find creative solutions instead of creating problems. When I had persisted, he had actually laughed and said that a little risk was the price of doing business in a competitive market. It was only when I realized he had no intention of stopping the illegal marketing that I had taken my concerns to the board of directors. I had followed every protocol, documented every conversation, and presented a clear case for why the company needed to act immediately. The board had agreed, the campaign had been shut down, and I had thought that was the end of it. I should have known better. Bennett Walsh was not the type of man to accept defeat gracefully, especially not from someone he viewed as beneath him in the corporate hierarchy. He had been planning this moment for 3 weeks, building a case against me with the same methodical precision that I used to build compliance cases against regulatory violators. The security guard who escorted me to my car was apologetic, almost embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Ms. Matthews," he said quietly as we waited for the elevator. "This doesn't feel right. Everyone knows how hard you work." I managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Marcus. That means more than you know." The drive home was a blur. I kept expecting to wake up from this nightmare, to realize that it was all some terrible mistake. But the termination letter sitting on my passenger seat was very real, and so was the sick feeling in my stomach. I had dedicated my entire adult life to this company, had sacrificed weekends and holidays, had turned down job offers from competitors because I believed in what we were doing. And this was how it ended. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, staring at my modest two-story home. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine, and I had been proud of what my work had allowed me to build. Now I wasn't sure how long I would be able to keep it. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "How did the Morrison presentation go? Are you celebrating tonight?" I had completely forgotten. I was supposed to present our quarterly compliance report to the board this afternoon, a presentation that would have highlighted our department's continued success and the money we had saved the company by catching the Morrison account issue early. Instead, I was sitting in my driveway, unemployed and reputation tarnished. I walked inside and collapsed onto my couch, still wearing my best navy suit and the pearl necklace my grandmother had given me for my law school graduation. I had worn it today for luck, believing that professionalism and preparation would protect me from Bennett's wrath. How naive I had been. The tears came then, hot and angry and full of 7 years of frustration. I had given everything to that company, and they had thrown me away like I was nothing. Worse, they had branded me as incompetent, as someone who couldn't do her job properly. In an industry where reputation was everything, that kind of black mark could follow me for years. But as I sat there, wallowing in self-pity and rage, something shifted in my mind. The initial shock was wearing off, and my legal training was starting to kick in. I began to think about what had really happened today, not just the emotional devastation but the tactical elements of Bennett's attack. He had been too eager, too quick to pull the trigger. He had made this personal when it should have been professional, and that was his first mistake. His second mistake was underestimating me. I walked to my home office and opened my laptop. Over the years, I had developed a habit of keeping detailed records of all my meetings and conversations. It was a practice that had served me well in compliance work, where documentation was everything. I had records of every interaction with Bennett, every email exchange, every meeting about the Morrison account. But as I scrolled through my files, I realized I had something even more valuable than documentation. 3 months ago, Bennett had called me into his office for what he had described as a frank conversation about departmental priorities. He had been frustrated with what he saw as my department's interference with the sales team's initiatives, and he had wanted to establish some ground rules. "Catherine," he had said, leaning back in his chair, "I need you to understand something. This company exists to make money. Everything else is secondary. When you see gray areas in the regulations, I need you to ignore them. Find ways to work around them. Be creative." I had been shocked by his directness, by his willingness to essentially order me to ignore potential legal violations. But I had also been smart enough to realize that this conversation could be important later. So I had done something I had never done before in a meeting with a superior. I had discreetly activated the voice recording app on my phone. The conversation had continued for another 20 minutes, with Bennett becoming increasingly explicit about his expectations. He had talked about the flexibility he expected from department heads, about the importance of supporting the business rather than creating unnecessary obstacles. He had even mentioned specific examples of regulations that he considered overly cautious and suggested ways that I could interpret them more liberally. At the time, I had been horrified by what I was hearing, but I had also been smart enough to keep recording, to let him dig his own grave with his own words. By the end of the conversation, I had a clear record of a senior executive ordering me to ignore federal regulations and engage in potentially illegal practices. I had never used the recording, had hoped I would never need to. But Bennett's actions today had changed everything. He had declared war on me, had tried to destroy my reputation and career. But he had forgotten that I was a lawyer first and a compliance officer second, and lawyers always kept their best evidence in reserve. My phone started buzzing with calls from the office. The caller ID showed Bennett's name, then several numbers I didn't recognize, then Bennett again. I let them all go to voicemail. For the first time since walking into his office this morning, I felt a spark of something other than despair. I felt power. The voicemails painted a picture of barely controlled panic. The first was from Bennett himself, his voice tight with stress. "Catherine, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Call me immediately." The second was from Janet Rodriguez, the head of our legal department. "Catherine, I know what happened today, and I think there might be a way to resolve this. Please call me back as soon as possible." The third was from someone I didn't expect, Richard Cole, the chairman of the board of directors. "Ms. Matthews, I've just been informed of your termination, and I have some serious concerns about the timing and circumstances. I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience." I saved the recording of my conversation with Bennett to multiple devices and cloud storage accounts before calling Mr. Cole back. When his assistant put me through, his voice was grave but respectful. "Catherine, I want to apologize for what happened today. I've been in emergency meetings all afternoon, and I'm beginning to understand that Mr. Walsh acted without proper authorization from the board." "I appreciate that, Mr. Cole," I said carefully. "But I have to ask, what changed? This morning I was fired for cause. This afternoon you're apologizing." There was a long pause. "The Morrison account situation has escalated. The FDA received an anonymous tip about our off-label marketing practices, and they're launching a formal investigation. We're looking at potential fines in the tens of millions, and we need our compliance department to be functioning at full capacity." I couldn't help but smile grimly. Bennett had been so focused on silencing me that he hadn't considered the possibility that someone else might have noticed the illegal marketing practices. The FDA investigation would proceed whether I was employed or not, but now Medicor needed me to help them navigate the regulatory nightmare. "I see," I said. "And you're hoping I'll come back to help clean up the mess." "I'm hoping you'll consider it," Mr. Cole said. "But I want to be clear about something. If you come back, it won't be as a regular employee. The board is prepared to offer you a consulting contract with full authority over compliance matters. You would report directly to me, not to Mr. Walsh." This was better than I had hoped. Not only would I be returning to work, but I would be returning with more power and autonomy than I had ever had. Bennett's attempt to destroy me had backfired spectacularly. "I'll need to see the terms of the contract before I agree to anything," I said. "Of course. Janet Rodriguez will send you a draft within the hour. But Catherine, I need to know, can you start tomorrow? We have an emergency meeting with the FDA on Friday, and we need you to lead our response." I looked at the termination letter still sitting on my desk, then at my laptop screen where the recording of Bennett's confession was ready to play. "I can start tomorrow, Mr. Cole, but I have some conditions of my own." 2 hours later, I had a signed consulting contract that paid me nearly double my previous salary, gave me complete authority over compliance matters, and included a clause that protected me from retaliation. More importantly, it included a provision that any attempt to terminate my contract would require approval from the full board of directors. I spent the evening preparing for my return, reviewing the Morrison account files, and preparing a comprehensive response to the FDA investigation. I also made copies of Bennett's recorded confession and secured them in multiple locations. I had a feeling I was going to need them. Walking into the Medicor building the next morning felt surreal. The same security guard who had escorted me out yesterday morning now greeted me warmly and handed me a new access badge. Word of my return had spread quickly through the office, and I could feel the stares and whispers as I made my way to the executive floor. My old office had been cleaned out, but Mr. Cole had arranged for me to have a temporary workspace in the executive suite while a new office was being prepared. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. I was no longer just a department head. I was now operating at the senior leadership level. Bennett was waiting for me when I arrived, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Catherine, we need to talk." "Actually, we don't," I said calmly, settling into my new desk. "I report to Mr. Cole now. If you have compliance-related concerns, you can submit them through proper channels." "You can't be serious," he said, his voice rising. "Yesterday, you were fired. Today you're acting like you run the place." "Yesterday I was fired by someone who didn't have the authority to fire me," I replied, not looking up from my computer. "Today I'm back to do the job I was hired to do, protecting this company from regulatory violations and the executives who enable them." The threat was subtle but clear, and Bennett's face went pale. He started to say something else, but Mr. Cole appeared in the doorway. "Bennett, I believe you have a meeting with the audit committee in 10 minutes, Mr. Cole said firmly. "Catherine, are you ready for our briefing?" As Bennett reluctantly left, Mr. Cole closed the door and took a seat across from my desk. "How are you feeling about all this?" he asked. "Honestly, vindicated," I said, "and ready to make sure something like this never happens again." The FDA meeting on Friday was a masterclass in compliance management. I presented a comprehensive response to their investigation, including detailed documentation of how we had discovered and shut down the illegal marketing practices. I also provided a timeline showing that the violations had been stopped immediately upon discovery and outlined the additional safeguards we were implementing to prevent future incidents. The FDA investigators were impressed by our cooperation and thoroughness. What could have been a devastating regulatory action resulted in a relatively minor fine and a consent decree that we were already prepared to implement. The company's stock price, which had plummeted when news of the investigation broke, recovered most of its losses by the end of the day. But the real victory came during the board meeting that afternoon. Mr. Cole presented a summary of the FDA meeting to the full board, praising my leadership and the compliance department's quick response. Several board members who had been skeptical of my approach in the past were now singing my praises. "Catherine's handling of this crisis has saved the company millions of dollars and preserved our reputation," Mr. Cole announced. "I'm recommending that we formalize her consulting arrangement and create a new position, Chief Compliance Officer, reporting directly to the board." It was everything I had worked toward for 7 years, the recognition and authority I had dreamed of. But as I sat in that boardroom, listening to the applause and congratulations, I couldn't help but notice Bennett's absence. He had been conspicuously missing from all the crisis meetings, and I had a feeling his story was far from over. My instincts proved correct. Over the next month, as I settled into my new role as Chief Compliance Officer, I began to notice subtle signs of sabotage. It started small, emails that didn't reach their intended recipients, meeting invitations that were mysteriously canceled, reports that were submitted with incorrect data. At first, I chalked it up to the normal chaos that follows a major organizational change. But as the incidents became more frequent and more targeted, I realized that someone was systematically trying to undermine my authority and effectiveness. The breakthrough came when Jennifer Chun, one of my most trusted compliance analysts, came to me with a concerned expression. "Catherine, I need to show you something," she said, closing my office door behind her. She handed me a printed email that appeared to be from my account to the head of our clinical trials department. The email contained instructions to overlook minor protocol deviations in upcoming drug trials and to prioritize speed over excessive caution. It was signed with my name and included my official signature block. "I've never seen this email before," I said, studying the document carefully. "This isn't something I would ever write." "I know," Jennifer said, "but it's been forwarded to several department heads, and people are starting to question whether you're really as committed to compliance as you claim." I felt a familiar surge of anger, the same feeling I had experienced in Bennett's office 6 weeks earlier. But this time, I was better prepared. I had learned from my previous encounter with corporate sabotage, and I was ready to fight back with intelligence rather than emotion. "Jennifer, I need you to help me with something," I said. "I want you to start documenting every unusual incident you notice, missing emails, changed documents, anything that seems out of place. But don't tell anyone else what you're doing." Over the next 2 weeks, Jennifer and I built a comprehensive log of suspicious activities. We discovered that several important emails had been deleted from my sent folder, that meeting notes had been altered after I had submitted them, and that reports I had written were being circulated with unauthorized modifications. The pattern was clear and sophisticated. Someone with significant technical knowledge and access to the company's systems was conducting a careful campaign to make me look incompetent and untrustworthy. They were using my own reputation for thoroughness against me, making it appear that I was making careless mistakes or, worse, deliberately compromising compliance standards. I had a strong suspicion about who was behind the sabotage, but I needed proof. So I did what any good compliance officer would do. I set a trap. I created a fake document, a draft memo about a fictional compliance issue in our European operations. I made sure the document contained several deliberate errors and questionable recommendations that would be alarming to anyone who received it. Then I saved it to my computer and waited. 3 days later, Jennifer came to me with a concerned expression. "Catherine, I'm getting questions about this memo," she said, handing me a printed copy of my fake document. "Several people received copies, and they're worried about the recommendations you're making." But the copies she handed me had been modified. The deliberate errors I had included were still there, but someone had added additional language that made the recommendations even more problematic. They had taken my trap and turned it into an even more damaging piece of evidence against me. More importantly, the metadata on the document showed that it had been accessed and modified from Bennett's computer terminal. I now had proof of who was behind the sabotage, but I still needed to understand the full scope of his campaign. So I did something that felt both familiar and empowering. I started building a case. Working with Jennifer and 2 other trusted colleagues, I began systematically documenting every instance of sabotage. We traced the altered documents back to their sources, identified the patterns in the timing and targeting of the attacks, and built a comprehensive timeline of Bennett's activities. What we discovered was breathtaking in its scope and sophistication. Bennett had been conducting a months-long campaign to undermine not just me, but the entire compliance department. He had been altering reports to make it appear that we were missing important violations, modifying correspondence to make it seem like we were being uncooperative with regulators, and even falsifying budget documents to make it look like we were wasting company resources. His goal was clear. He wanted to prove that the compliance department was ineffective and that the company would be better off with a more flexible approach to regulatory matters. He was essentially trying to undo everything I had built over the past 7 years, and he was doing it with a level of technical sophistication that suggested he had been planning this for a long time. But Bennett had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated my ability to adapt and fight back. The woman who had been shocked and devastated by her termination 6 weeks earlier was gone, replaced by someone who understood that corporate warfare required the same level of strategic thinking and documentation that I brought to compliance work. I spent the next week preparing my counterattack, gathering evidence, and building an airtight case against Bennett's sabotage. I also made sure to create multiple backup copies of all evidence, storing them in secure locations that Bennett couldn't access. I was ready for the final confrontation. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Mr. Cole called me into his office on a Tuesday morning with a grave expression. "Catherine, we need to talk about some concerns that have been raised about your department's performance." I felt my heart sink for a moment, wondering if Bennett's sabotage campaign had succeeded despite my preparation. But then I saw the manila folder on Mr. Cole's desk and realized that this might be exactly the opening I needed. "I'd be happy to address any concerns," I said carefully. "The audit committee has been reviewing some irregularities in compliance reporting," Mr. Cole continued. "There are questions about the accuracy of several documents that appear to have come from your department." I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment I had been preparing for. "Mr. Cole, I'm glad you brought this to my attention, because I have some serious concerns about those same irregularities." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder containing all the evidence Jennifer and I had compiled. Over the past month, I've been investigating a systematic campaign of sabotage against my department. I believe someone has been deliberately altering our documents and reports to make it appear that we're not doing our job properly. Mr. Cole's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation, Catherine. Do you have evidence to support it?" I handed him the folder. "I have comprehensive documentation of unauthorized access to our systems, altered documents, and falsified reports. I also have clear evidence of who is responsible for these activities." As Mr. Cole reviewed the evidence, his expression grew increasingly grave. The technical logs showing unauthorized access from Bennett's terminal were damning enough, but the pattern of alterations and the timing of the sabotage painted a picture of a deliberate and sustained attack on the compliance department. "This is remarkable work, Catherine," he said finally, "and deeply troubling. If these allegations are accurate, we're looking at serious misconduct by a senior executive." "I believe they are accurate," I said. "And I believe there's more that we haven't discovered yet." I think Mr. Walsh has been conducting this campaign for months, possibly since before my termination. Mr. Cole closed the folder and looked at me intently. What do you recommend we do? I recommend a full forensic audit of all systems access and document modifications over the past 6 months, I said. I also recommend that we involve outside counsel to ensure that the investigation is conducted properly. Agreed, he said. I'll arrange for an emergency meeting of the audit committee for tomorrow morning. Can you present your findings to the full committee? I'd be honored to, I said. The next morning, I found myself in the same boardroom where I had been celebrated just 6 weeks earlier. But this time, the atmosphere was tense and serious. The audit committee consisted of 3 board members, including Mr. Cole, plus the company's outside counsel and a forensic accountant they had brought in overnight. Bennett was also there, his face pale and his hands visibly shaking. He knew why he had been called to this meeting, and he knew that his carefully constructed campaign of sabotage was about to be exposed. I presented my findings methodically, walking through each piece of evidence and explaining how it fit into the larger pattern of sabotage. I showed them the technical logs, the alter documents, and the timeline of activities. I also played the recording of Bennett's confession from 3 months earlier, the one where he had ordered me to ignore the gray areas in federal regulations. The committee listened in stunned silence as the full scope of Bennett's misconduct became clear. He had not only engaged in a systematic campaign of sabotage, but he had also attempted to pressure me into violating federal regulations and had then retaliated against me when I refused to comply. When I finished my presentation, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Mr. Cole turned to Bennett with a cold stare. Mr. Walsh, these are extremely serious allegations. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Bennett looked like a man who had just realized his house was on fire. He stammered something about misunderstandings and technical glitches, but his explanations were weak and unconvincing. When pressed about the recording of our conversation, he claimed he had been speaking hypothetically and that I had misinterpreted his instructions. Let me be clear about something, I said, looking directly at Bennett. There was no misinterpretation. You ordered me to ignore federal regulations, and when I refused, you retaliated against me. When that didn't work, you launched a campaign of sabotage designed to destroy my reputation and undermine the compliance department. You put this company and its patients at risk because you couldn't accept that compliance and profitability can coexist. Bennett's face turned red with anger. You self-righteous, he started, but Mr. Cole cut him off. That's enough, Mr. Cole said firmly. Mr. Walsh, you're suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. Security will escort you from the building. As the meeting ended and Bennett was led away, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare that had begun with my termination 2 months earlier was finally over. Bennett's campaign of sabotage had been exposed, his misconduct had been documented, and his ability to harm the company had been ended. But more than that, I had proven something important to myself. I had shown that intelligence, preparation, and integrity could triumph over corporate bullying and corruption. I had not just survived Bennett's attacks. I had turned them into the very evidence that brought about his downfall. 2 weeks later, the board announced Bennett's termination and my promotion to Senior Vice President of Compliance and Risk Management. The new position gave me direct oversight of all regulatory matters and a seat on the executive committee. It was a level of authority and recognition that I had never imagined possible when I started my career 7 years earlier. 6 months have passed since that final confrontation in the boardroom, and I often find myself reflecting on the journey that brought me here. The naive young lawyer who had started at Medicore 7 years ago would never have imagined that her career would include termination, corporate sabotage, and boardroom warfare. But I've learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we never wanted to fight. When Bennett first fired me, I felt like a victim of circumstances beyond my control. I was devastated, angry, and ready to give up on the pharmaceutical industry entirely. But somewhere in the depths of that despair, I found something I hadn't known I possessed, the strength to fight back intelligently and strategically. The experience taught me that integrity doesn't just mean doing the right thing when it's easy. It means doing the right thing when it's hard, when it's dangerous, when it threatens everything you've worked for. It means standing up to bullies and corrupt executives, even when they have the power to destroy your career. More importantly, it taught me that the weapons of corporate warfare aren't just politics and connections, they're documentation, evidence, and the patient accumulation of facts. My legal training had always emphasized the importance of building strong cases, but I had never applied those skills to defending my own career and reputation. The recording of Bennett's confession became legendary within the company. It was a perfect example of how patience and preparation can turn an executive's own words against them. But it also demonstrated something more important: the power of staying true to your principles even when faced with enormous pressure to compromise. I still keep a copy of that recording in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how easily things can go wrong when leaders prioritize profits over principles. It reminds me that the work I do isn't just about regulatory compliance. It's about protecting patients, preserving trust, and ensuring that the pharmaceutical industry lives up to its responsibility to society. My department has grown significantly since Bennett's departure. We now have 25 employees and have expanded our mission to include not just regulatory compliance, but also ethics training and corporate governance. We've become a model for other pharmaceutical companies, and I'm regularly invited to speak at industry conferences about building effective compliance programs. But perhaps the most satisfying change has been the company's culture. Under new leadership, Medicor has embraced a philosophy that compliance and profitability are not just compatible, they're essential partners. We've discovered that doing the right thing isn't just morally correct, it's also good business. Our reputation for integrity has attracted top talent, improved our relationships with regulators, and enhanced our standing with investors. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had simply accepted Bennett's termination and moved on to another company. I might have found another job, rebuilt my career, and eventually forgotten about the injustice. But I'm glad I didn't take that path. By fighting back, I not only vindicated myself, I helped create a better company and a safer environment for patients. The experience also taught me something important about leadership. Real leaders don't just manage their departments and hit their targets. They stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. They protect their teams from unethical pressure. They use their positions to make their organizations better, not just more profitable. I'm now in a position to ensure that no other employee at Medicor will face the kind of retaliation I experienced. We've implemented new whistleblower protections, created independent reporting channels, and established clear consequences for executives who try to compromise our ethical standards. The young compliance officer who was fired for doing her job has been replaced by a senior executive who has the authority and responsibility to protect others from similar treatment. It's a transformation that began with a termination letter and a secret recording, but it was completed through persistence, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to doing the right thing. As I sit in my office today, looking out at the city's skyline and reflecting on the journey that brought me here, I'm grateful for everything that happened, even the pain and fear of those dark days after my termination. Those experiences taught me who I really am and what I'm capable of when faced with adversity. I learned that being fired isn't the end of the story. It's sometimes just the beginning of a better chapter. I learned that corporate bullies are often their own worst enemies, and that patience and preparation can turn their weapons against them. Most importantly, I learned that integrity isn't just about personal satisfaction. It's about creating a better world for everyone. The pharmaceutical industry is built on trust. Patients trust us to develop safe and effective medications. Doctors trust us to provide accurate information about our products. Regulators trust us to follow the law and report problems honestly. That trust is fragile and precious, and it's worth fighting to protect. My battle with Bennett Walsh wasn't just about my career or my reputation. It was about preserving that trust and ensuring that Medicor would continue to earn it. In the end, that's what made the fight worthwhile. Not the promotion or the recognition, but the knowledge that I had helped protect something much more important than my own interests. Today, when young employees come to me with ethical concerns or regulatory questions, I listen carefully and take their concerns seriously. I remember what it felt like to be dismissed and retaliated against, and I'm determined to create an environment where doing the right thing is always supported and rewarded. The story of my termination and reinstatement has become part of Medicorp's culture, a reminder that the company values integrity above all else. It's a story that I hope will inspire other employees to speak up when they see something wrong, knowing that they will be supported rather than punished for their courage. Looking back, I realized that Bennett Walsh actually did me a favor. His attempts to destroy me forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I had and to fight for principles I might have taken for granted. His sabotage campaign taught me valuable lessons about corporate warfare that have made me a better leader and a more effective advocate for ethical business practices. The termination letter that seemed like the end of my career was actually the beginning of my transformation from a department manager into a true corporate leader. The secret recording that I almost didn't make became the foundation for a new chapter in my life and career. I keep both documents in my desk drawer now, the termination letter and a transcript of the recording. They remind me that every challenge is an opportunity, every setback is a setup for a comeback, and every fight for integrity is worth winning. The pharmaceutical industry needs people who are willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It needs compliance officers who can't be bought, intimidated, or silenced. It needs leaders who understand that the ultimate measure of success isn't quarterly profits, but the trust and respect of patients, colleagues, and society. That's the legacy I want to leave, not just as someone who survived corporate warfare, but as someone who used that experience to make the industry better. The battle with Bennett Walsh is over, but the war for integrity and ethical leadership continues. And I'm proud to be fighting on the right side of that war. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones that nobody sees coming. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person your enemies tried to prevent you from becoming. And sometimes, the most satisfying ending is not the destruction of your opponents, but the creation of something better than what existed before. My story isn't really about winning or losing. It's about growing, learning, and refusing to let others define your worth or your future. It's about having the courage to fight back when you're knocked down, and the wisdom to use that fight to become stronger and better than you were before. The fluorescent lights in my office cast a warm glow across my desk as I finish writing this reflection. Outside, the city is bustling with activity, and somewhere in that activity are other people facing their own battles against injustice and corruption. I hope my story will inspire them to fight back, to document everything, and to never give up on the belief that integrity and intelligence can triumph over corporate bullying. The termination letter is still in my drawer, but it no longer represents the end of something. It represents the beginning of everything I've become since then. And that, I think, is the most important victory of all.